lineup of exceptional speakers with us today. The session is focused on understanding and exploring opportunities for greater value addition as well as value maximization in the food and agro-food processing sector. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mr. Sudhir Sitapati, the Managing Director and CEO of Godrej Consumer Product Private Limited, GCPL, who will be sharing valuable insights in the keynote address. GCPL is one of India's largest consumer goods multinationals with presence in over 85 countries and serving 1.2 billion consumers. Mr. Sudhir is responsible for guiding the purpose and ambition of the company to bring the goodness of health and beauty to consumers in emerging markets. He is current co-chair of CIA FMCG committee. Mr. Sudhir was awarded Young Alumni Achiever from his alma mater IIM Ahmedabad in 2017. He is also the author of best-selling book, The CEO Factory Management Lessons from Hindustan Lever. A round of applause for Mr. Sudhir Sitapati. Please, sir.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers, especially Mr. Vishnu, for inviting me here. I'm actually not the right person to be speaking here because the company that I work for today, which is GCPL, has very little to do with food and agri. But I have spent a decade in food and agri before that, and one of our sister concerns, Godrej Agro, is quite involved in agri. So I'm a bit of an outsider here. I think the experts are sitting here, so I'm not the expert. I'm only the outsider to give a few thought starters for the panel to debate. I think day before yesterday when I came to Chennai, I went for a book launch of Professor Raghurajan and my friend Rohit Lamba's book, Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future. It was an excellent session, excellent book. If you haven't read it, I would strongly advise you to get a copy and read it. However, I did have one sort of grouse over the entire session and the book. There was hardly any mention of food and agriculture. And that's a bit odd, because agriculture still accounts for 45% of Indians are employed in agriculture. And while agriculture as a percentage of GDP has fallen, food still remains 30 to 35% of India's GDP. It's still the largest contributor, food and agriculture, because of retailing and food services, etc. And poverty globally is defined in terms of nutrition. So whichever way you look at it, nutrition, food, agriculture, it is simply too important to only get 1 or 2 pages in a book on India's economic future. I think my Tamil is poor, but as Thiruvalluvar said, Urudu unda varvare valvar, matram lam, Thorudu unda pin selvavar. The one who plows eat their food. The conversation was around food agriculture. It has reduced a lot now, but the importance of the sector is not reduced at all. So what I would like to do in this speech is to take a step back, look at India's nutrition challenges, because one of my main points that I want to leave with the panel here is agriculture must follow nutrition strategy. Agriculture is not an end in itself. It has to follow that is what it was in the 50s and 60s, where we had a calorie sufficiency issue. Food processing must follow agriculture. So this is the sequence. So let me first start about the state of mass nutrition in India. Our early policy planned on making us agriculture sufficient. But if you look at now where we are, India has now moved from a calorie deficient country to a calorie surplus country. In the 60s, we were consuming about 1800 calories a day. We are now consuming 2500 calories a day. Any more and we will be over consuming calories. But the new nutrition challenge in India has not so much to do with calorie sufficiency, but much more to do with quality of nutrition. And that is an area that not enough thought and not enough conversation is happening. If you look at global standards, they recommend 60% of our calories must be proteins, 60% must be carbohydrates, 20% proteins, and 20% everything else, particularly fat. In India, 75 to 80% of what we consume are carbohydrates, and only 10% of what we consume are proteins. So there is a big misbalance in India between consumption of carbohydrates and proteins. And if actually one looks at health statistics, and I had done some work some time ago, saying, okay, we say India has got a lot of diabetes, India has got a lot of cardiac issues. Let us compare Indian numbers versus South Asia numbers versus global numbers. If you actually look at that lens, India actually has less diabetes incidence and less cardiac incidents than many developed countries. There are two areas where India is out of the charts in terms of ill health. The first is underweight children. India has 36% of underweight children. Even South Asia, which is Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, is 27%, and the average in the world is 14%. Stunting, which is undergrowth children, India is 38, South Asia is 36, and the world is 22. So the one big problem that India has is our children are not growing fast and strong enough, and it is not just weak compared to the world, it is weak compared to the neighbors itself. The second big problem that India has, when you just coldly look at the statistics, is anemia. Both anemia and malnutrition are caused by a lack of proteins and a lack of micronutrients. So if one looks at Indians, how we consume, how we are ill health, they are going back to an overconsumption of carbohydrates and an underconsumption of protein and micronutrients. So the next question is, why do Indians consume so much carbohydrates and so little proteins, so little fruits and vegetables? Also, by the way, we consume less. And the reason is quite simple, which is ultimately all food sources are calorie sources, and we naturally gravitate towards the cheapest calorie sources. Now, Indian prices of food sources are extremely distorted. Rice and wheat are practically free for a majority of Indians, but even for those who paid, and I did some back of the envelope calculations, if you go to a supermarket and bought rice or wheat, it's about 2 rupees for every 100 kilocalories that you get from rice. If you went to the UK and bought it in a supermarket, it is 4 rupees for 100 kilocalories. So rice and wheat are half the price of what they are in the UK, and actually for most of Indians it's actually free. But if you look at chicken or milk, in India actually even on an absolute basis the price of chicken is higher than it is in the UK. On an absolute basis our price of milk is higher than it is in the UK or Australia. So India has a very, very wide distortion in prices between carbohydrates and protein prices. So if you have this kind of distortion, so whatever the cultural thing, you have this kind of distortion, then obviously chicken will become I'll only eat chicken on Sunday, or I'll only eat chicken on Friday, or I'll eat mutton on Friday. So that's what's happening in India because of this differential prices. So now to understand why is it that India has such differential prices between carbohydrates and proteins, let me simplify it by saying proteins, but it's also fruits and vegetables and micronutrients. One has to look at India's agriculture policy. As I mentioned, our policy was driven by food insecurity. In 1965, we had a major catastrophic event where we thought we would starve, and government made massive investments in calories, and the cheapest form of calories were rice and wheat. So we did free irrigation, new seeds, food was also subsidized, and it was a genuine revolution. I think with no taking away from the fact that in 20 years' time, India moved from calorie deficiency to calorie surplus. But as a consequence of this, by the 1980s, we were overproducing wheat and rice. And as a consequence of this subsidy, and my grandmother would tell me that when she was growing up, millets, which is now a big millets machine, used to be cheaper than rice and wheat. Now millets are more expensive. You want to go and buy ragi and bajra in the supermarket, they're more expensive than rice. So what used to be a poor person's dish, and it was eaten by poor people because it's cheaper, because of this oversupply of wheat and rice has become more expensive, has become much cheaper than millets. And this is true about everything. So low rice and wheat prices are part of the problem, but every other sector has frankly been ignored. And I can say this because I'm not part of the sector anymore, so I have no axe to grind. For example, if you look at milk, our milk prices are 50% higher than New Zealand. If you look at meat, chicken, we have a totally inefficient supply chain. It is completely, the way we look at rice and millets, there's no real focus on it. So again, price of chicken in the US, price of feeds for chicken in the US are much lower, imports are not allowed, so it's a very controlled environment. Fruits and vegetable prices are high because food processing is poor, so 30 to 40% of fruits and vegetables are wasted. The only non-carbohydrate commodity where prices are global is oil. Palm oil prices are rough, and that is because we have a relatively liberal source of liberal policy on imports of palm oil, and therefore those prices are okay, and therefore fat consumption in India is roughly what it should be. So Indians consume too much carbohydrates, reasonable amount of fat, and too little proteins, and the zero import duty on palm oil should tell you why this has to do with prices. So if you really want to focus on nutrition, and I'll come to agriculture in a minute, India needs to do three things. The first is we have to move our subsidies from rye and wheat out of a budget of 35 lakh crores on revenue expenditure. 6 lakh crores is spent on agriculture. 80% of that is rice and wheat. So 4.8 lakh crores, higher than the defense budget of India, is spent in rice and wheat. So it's very different from 70s. We're a very different country today than what we were at that time. So A, we have to move subsidies from rice and wheat to millets, proteins, fruits and vegetables. We have to liberalize imports. Nutrition is more important. We'll come to agricultural employment. But wherever food sources are inefficient or expensive in India, like in the case of oils, we must bring it in. We're again not a country which is foreign exchange deficient the way we were even in the 90s. So, that's not a problem anymore. And we need to improve supply chain barriers in food processing. So that's really the kind of solving the puzzle of nutrition. But agriculture plays a primary role in my view on nutrition, but it does play a very, very important secondary role in terms of employment. Agriculture contributes 18% of our GDP, but employs 45% of our workforce. GDP growth over the last decade in agriculture has been 3% compared to an overall GDP growth at 6%. So that contribution is shrinking. I think there's an implicit strategy, including in Professor Raghurajan's book, that we have to solve this problem by services and industrialization. Now the problem with manufacturing, and many of us here will know, is manufacturing today is not what it was in the 80s. It doesn't have the potential to generate that kind of jobs that China did, where thousands of people are sitting on, Foxconn lines and making Apple phones. It's much more automated. Services, India's competitive advantage, services employment, on where we have a competitive advantage, on IT, BPO is a very small proportion. It may have a knockdown, but that's not enough to employ, half of Indians. So we've got to deal with the problem of agriculture in a new way and not look at it the way China did or the West did, which was to move agriculture to manufacturing. So I think the question is to have farm income to rise. It is important for farmers, and again it goes back to the same thing. Farm incomes in India and farm yields in India are low because farmers are growing rice and wheat and they're not transitioning adequately and fast enough to cash crops. I am just back from Kunnur. I went for a holiday and I worked for many years. I worked for a decade in tea. And I know the tea sector well. Now the tea sector was developed 100 years ago. It was a progressive view on agriculture, and I know the tea workers in Tamil Nadu have definitely higher standard of living, better wages, better incomes, whatever the problems are, than most of the other marginal farmers across the country. And the tea industry did 4 things right. The first is the right selection of crop by the government. And I feel now the time has come for us not to select crops that save foreign exchange, because IT and BPO is earning foreign exchange, but for us to select crops where we have a competitive advantage. And Nilgiri's had a competitive advantage on tea. Private sector capital investment, cooperative farming. So even now in the tea sector, 50% of it is plantation, 50% of it is small holdings, and processing and packaging of the produce, which rates the commodity price. And that's what's made tea successful in India, coffee successful, spices somewhat successful, fisheries somewhat successful. So 3-4 successful, but these are all like 30, 40, 50 year successes. I think the big thing that needs to be done, I think 2 things to really move up agriculture. One is to move away from this forex, which is again a relic of the past, that we must conserve forex. I don't think that's so relevant anymore. That's number one. And the second thing,
இதனை நான் இவன் முடிப்போம் நன்றாய்ந்து அதனை எதன் கண் விழல் இந்த வள்ளுவனின் வாக்கு கணக்கு அருமையான ஒரு பேனல் லிஸ்ட் வச்சிருக்கவங்களுக்கு நன்றி. முதல் கேள்வி, கடைசி கேள்வி அதுதான் எங்கள் சைட்லேருந்து. எம்எஸ்எம்இக்கு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா ஃபுட் பார்க் பண்ணியிருக்கிறாங்க. சாரே சொன்னாங்க, அதாவது பார்த்தீங்கன்னா 3 இடத்துல ஃபுட் பார்க் பண்ணியிருக்காங்க. அங்கே பார்த்தீங்கன்னா 99 years லீஸ் அப்படின்ற ஒரு கண்டிஷன் இருக்கு. அந்த 99 years லீஸுங்கிறது எப்போ மாற்ற போறீங்க? இல்லாட்டி யாருமே உள்ளார வர போறது இல்லை. ஏன்னா பார்த்தீங்கன்னா சிப்காட்குள்ளே யாருமே வர முடியாது. வெளியில பிரைவேட் லேண்ட் வாங்கி போயிடலாம். 99 years லீஸ் பண்ணா என்னுடைய அடுத்த சந்ததிக்காக தான் நான் பிசினஸ் ஸ்டார்ட் பண்றேன். என்னோட அடுத்த சந்ததி அதுக்குள்ள வரலன்னா அதை தொழில் விட்டே வெளில போயிட முடியும். லேண்டே என்னோடது இல்லைன்ற கண்டிஷன் வருது. காஸ்ட் கொடுத்து வாங்குறோம். அது ஒண்ணு. ரெண்டாவது பாத்தீங்கன்னா சார் சொன்ன மாதிரி ட்ரிச்சி டு நாகப்பட்டினம் அக்ரி காரிடோர் அனௌன்ஸ் பண்ணி 2.5 years ஆயிடுச்சு. இது வரைக்கும் ட்ரிச்சி டு நாகப்பட்டினத்துல ட்ரிச்சி மணப்பாறையை தவிர வேற எங்கேயும் ஃபுட் பார்க் இல்ல. எப்ப கொண்டுட்டு வர போறீங்க? தேங்க்யூ.
தேங்க்யூ. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் ஆஃப் ஆல் அது லீஸா இல்ல outright purchase அப்படிங்கிறது வந்து it is a policy decision of the government definitely. 99 years is a very long time. அப்படிதான் வச்சிருக்காங்க. நீங்க சொல்லிட்டீங்க, I will represent this. திருச்சி மணப்பாறை அக்ரோ இண்டஸ்ட்ரியல் காரிடார் 2 வருஷம் அனௌன்ஸ்மெண்ட் பண்ணி ஆச்சுனாலும் ஒரு ப்ராஜெக்ட் அப்ரூவ் ஆகி அது வந்து கிளியர் ஆகிறதுக்கு it will take so much time. It's called incubation time. It is over now. So now only a month ago this was approved. Therefore from now on this will be on a very fast mode to get into action. Yeah, in all the places, in every district there will be a mini food park in all the 5 districts, and there will be promotion of industries, and if some industries wants to move into Delta, there are supports for moving. Shifting also is supported, and there is a support on the electricity, support on the employment, and a lot of different things. We will come in the public place.
Sir, I am from Sipcot retired area. He is telling land is allotted for 99 years lease. Lease is equal to sale. Nobody is live 99 years. It can be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Whoever owns the land, he is the owner. He wants to change the management. It is permissible. Subject to that, the differential cost is applicable. So, lease is equal to change of management. We can get market with the consortium of international bank. So far, 30,000 acres allotted all over Tamil Nadu. It is controlling the fact. If it is a sale, there was no control. For your information, take Siko Industrial Estate, Ambatu. Object is changed. IT industries, hospital, hotel industries coming. Whereas in Sipcot, those who are manufacturing is alone is permitted, not for trading. Only 5% of the land is allotted for trading. Lease is equal to sale. Anybody can change any number of times within 99 years.
Point very well taken. Thank you very much. Let it be a quick question and quick answer.
Good afternoon, one and all. I am Ratnavel, the president of the Agro Food Chamber of Commerce and Industry from Madurai. The good takeaway from this panel meeting is, don't compromise taste on the ground of health. It's a very good takeaway. ஏன்னா இப்போ மிஸ்டர் அழகுசுந்தரம் பேசும்போது டேர் ஏபெக்ஸ்லேருந்து 12,000 யூனிட்ஸ் போடணும் அப்படின்லாம் சொன்னார். 8,000 யூனிட்ஸ் போட்டுக்கிறதாகவும் சொன்னார். பட் ஒரு ஸ்டாட்டிஸ்டிக்ஸ் மிஸ்ஸிங். இந்த 8,000 எவ்வளவு சக்சஸ்ஃபுல்லாக கண்டினியூஸாக ரன் பண்ணுறாரு, அந்த ஸ்டாட்டிஸ்டிக்ஸ் நம்ம வரணும். அது வரலைன்னா அர்த்தமே இல்லை. நான் முடிச்சிடறேன். இது ஒரு பக்கம். இன்னொன்று, நமக்கு தேவைகளே நிறைய. இது நீங்கள் ஃபர்னிஷ் பண்ணலை. இப்போ நிறைய பேருக்கு வந்து எஃப்எஸ்எஸ்ஏ ஆக்டில் ப்ராப்ளம் இருக்குது. சின்ன சின்ன சேஞ்சஸ் பண்ண வேண்டியது இருக்குது. இதுக்கு என்னென்னா, we have to go to Delhi. அங்கே போய் எல்லாரையும் மீட் பண்ணி we have to represent. How we can make it? ஒன்றும் இல்லை, அந்த அப்பளம் பண்ணுறாங்க சார், பிக் இண்டஸ்ட்ரி மதுரை அண்ட் அதர் ஏரியா. இதில் ஒரு சின்ன ப்ராப்ளம் இருக்குது, which can be rectified. முடியலை. நான் என்ன சொல்றேன், நீங்க டேர் எஃபெக்ட்ஸ்ல இருந்து யூ ஹேவ் எ ஃபோரம் ஹியர். எஃப்எஸ்எஸ்ஏ இங்கே எதுவும் ப்ராப்ளம் இங்கே வாங்க, நாங்கள் டெல்லி போய் என்ன பண்ண முடியும்? இன்னொன்று, இந்த லேப் வந்து ஒன்றுமே இல்லை. நீங்கள் சொன்னீங்க எக்ஸ்போர்ட் பண்ணுறது ஒன் ஆஃப் த ஆப்ஜெக்ட். இப்போ நாங்கள் மதுரையில் வந்து ஒரு பெரிய இன்ஃப்ரா டெவலப் பண்ணியிருக்கோம். அனந்தராமகிருஷ்ணன் சொன்ன ஒரு அக்ரோ ட்ரேட் சென்டர்னு பெருசாக பண்ணியிருக்கோம். வித் எய்ட் ஆஃப் த சென்ட்ரல் கவர்மெண்ட். அதில் நாங்கள் லேப் வச்சுருக்கோம். NABL அக்ரெடிட்டட் லேபே வச்சுருக்கோம். எக்ஸ்போர்ட் பண்ணுறதுக்கு எங்கள்கிட்ட எக்யூப்மெண்ட்டே இல்லை. அதெல்லாம் காஸ்ட்லியாக இருக்குது. சப்சிடைஸ் பண்ணி கொடுக்க மாட்டேங்கிறாங்க. யூ சே தட் வி ஹேவ் டு எக்ஸ்போர்ட்டை சர்டிஃபை பண்ணுற லேப் வி ஷுட் ஹேவ். இது இல்லைன்னா முடியாது. ஸோ எஃப்எஸ்எஸ்ஏ பாருங்க, லேபை பாருங்க. நல்லா சொன்னீங்க டேஸ்ட்னு. மில்லட்ஸுக்கு ஒரு எக்ஸிபிஷன் நடத்துகிறோம் இன்டர்நேஷனல். வண்டர்ஃபுல் ப்ராடக்ட்ஸ் பண்ணாங்க. ஆனால் எல்லாம் மருந்து மாதிரி இருக்கு. அந்த இடத்துல சாப்பிட்டு we have to leave it. தயவு செய்து நீங்க பிரச்சாரம் பண்ணுங்க. இந்த மில்லட்ஸ் எல்லாம் ஃபோர்ட்டிஃபைடா தான் இருக்கணும். இப்போ கூட நான் ஒரு விளம்பரம் பார்த்தேன். தோசை மாவுல கொஞ்சம் கலங்க டேஸ்ட் மாறலைன்னு சொன்னாங்க, நல்லா கவனிச்சுக்கோங்க. ஸோ நம்ம என்ன டேஸ்ட் சாப்பிட்றோமோ அதில் தான் மில்லட்ஸ் எல்லாம் கொண்டு வர முடியும். தயவுசெய்து ப்ளீஸ் எஜுகேட். தேங்க்யூ.
Yeah, all points taken, sir. We will handle it. TN Apex will become one-stop solution for all such needs in a very short time.